So you decided you wanted to start painting miniatures. Whether you saw a box of Warhammer and saw the box art and thought, oh, that's cool, or you watched a cool YouTube video or an Instagram and you said to yourself, I could do that, but you have a problem. You don't know where to start. I think I can help you there. So the first things first, you're going to need something to paint. And my buddy Saul asked me something that I actually didn't really think about. Where do I get miniatures to paint? I hadn't really thought about that, but the short answer is you can get them from a board game store or a hobby store or a card game store. A lot of these places sell miniature kits, model kits, mostly Warhammer 40K to paint. If you have a place that sells D&D books, odds are they also sell the little D&D miniatures, which I'll talk about later. But you can also find them, of course, online from retailers like Games Workshop or Corvus Belli or Reaper. I think they're still around. I'll have to double check that before the video comes out and see whether or not Reaper's still around to make bones. But also a board game. If you've got a board game like Hero Quest or one like Betrayal that has miniatures in it as well, or something like Scythe. A lot of board games have miniatures nowadays, and you can always just paint those miniatures. As you can see in the video that I put out, why you should paint your board game miniatures. But there are a lot of options out there for what you want to paint. And obviously, if you want to start painting Warhammer, you're going to need a Warhammer model kit. Now, this one actually doesn't have any models in it. These are all just... Those are just sprues with spare bits, which you should keep, by the way, because you can always use them for cool things. They're fairly easy to come by nowadays. I had no idea where to get them when I first started painting miniatures, but that was a long time ago. So, Age of Sigmar is the fantasy version of Warhammer 40K, which Age of Sigmar players would probably get mad at me for saying that. If you decide you want to go for one of those, that's great, but God help you for the plastic crack addiction that you will inevitably contract from joining the wargaming hobby. Another good one to start with, which I mentioned earlier, were the D&D figures, the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures, as they're called on this one. They're not called it on this one, but it says so on the back. These are really easy to find. They're also really cheap. This one, as you can probably see from the price, is $5 for 2 miniatures that already come pre-primed. And the Warhammer kits can run you anywhere from like $30 to $60 to hundreds of dollars depending on what you're getting. You can get a great big army box for $100 and something. It's got a ton of minis in it and a ton of plastic miniatures in it that are really easy to assemble and paint. That can be very expensive if you're just trying to start off on the hobby. Now, a lot of people who have painted for a long time might be screaming at their monitors that these pre-primed minis are not good to start off on, but breathe for just a second and I will explain to you later on why they are potentially a good choice to make if you're interested in starting the miniature painting hobby. I am going to make a video about the mini painting process. Specifically, what I will say right now, before I go any farther about the D&D minis, is that they come pre-primed, and if you live in an apartment or a college dorm and you don't have anywhere that you can safely spray prime miniatures outdoors, then having a pre-prime mini that you don't have to like manually brush on primer for is gonna save you a lot of time, headache, and money because you won't have to buy primer if you're just like, I'm curious, I wanna try. And the cool thing about all of these is they come with 2 minis, so if you screw one up, you have a spare. So the one that you don't like the most out of the pair, paint that one first, and that way you can make all the mistakes on that one, and then paint the one that you really like when you got more experience. That's just a brief breakdown of minis that I would recommend starting off on painting. Games Workshop miniatures, Warhammer 40K, Age of Sigmar are generally easy to find, and they're really easy to work with, especially if you're interested in the model building aspect of the hobby. I think that that's a really good place to start. The only reason why I would be hesitant to recommend you to go out and buy a Warhammer kit is because they are expensive. And if you mess up an expensive model, you just chucked like $30 to $60 in the garbage can, which, I mean, who can do that nowadays, right? Now that you've got something to paint, obviously the next logical step is you need the paint to put on it. So Leandro asks, what kind of paint works best, and do I need to use any primer? Well, Leandro, yes, you do need to use primer when you're doing your miniatures, because if you don't have a coat of primer, then it's going to cause your miniatures to scratch. As to which type of paint to use, so the first thing you're going to see that's easiest to come by are these little paint pots here. These are Games Workshop Citadel paints. They are the easiest paints to find. I think this is actually an older one, but they look pretty much like this nowadays. They come in different flavors, is what I would say. They come in base coats, layer coats. These are the easiest to find, but however, they are also the most expensive. One 12 milliliter pot of Games Workshop paint is going to cost you $4.55 according to their website. And that's not including shipping, obviously. And your game stores are probably going to charge you something similar, if not more, just because of the way that the pricing works at stores. Compare that to 18 milliliter bottle of Army Paints War Paints Fanatic range, which is also comes in this nifty little dropper bottle. This one is $4.35 on their website. So take that for what you will and use your own discretion when it comes to what you want. Both of these are good paints. The only reason why I do not recommend buying Citadel paints is the price, and also I do not like the containers they come in. You see they have these little flip tops, which the paint comes out on this little spout here, and that's all well and good, but you end up wasting a lot of paint, and not a lot of paint comes in these things. This, you can probably hear that, maybe, I don't know, but there's a little rattle ball in there to help mix it up. And they also come in these little dropper bottles that you can really control how much paint you are actually using. You get more paint. The Fanatics range from Army Painter is really, really good, and I honestly would recommend using that if you're just starting off, because you're going to get more paint, and it's going to be easier for you to use it, and also you have made the right choice when it comes to the vessel. So another type of paint you're going to see besides just the regular Games Workshop paint is contrast paint. And a lot of people recommend this for beginners because it's got really good coverage and it's really easy to use. However, I don't recommend getting a whole lot of this stuff because it is very expensive and it's hard to work with if you don't know how to work with it, despite being marketed as sort of a beginner product. The other type of Games Workshop paint, what I actually do recommend you get, is the shades. These shades are washes, and a lot of experienced mini painters kind of cringe at using washes nowadays because it's kind of seen as, I guess, a noob technique. I don't know, but they come in very useful, and Games Workshop makes some of the best washes out there, or they used to at least. I'm unsure about their current washes. They feel more like the contrast paints, but they are a good place to start with washes anyway. You might also see some Games Workshop paints in dropper bottles on my desk. I did that myself. I went and bought from Amazon a bunch of empty little dropper bottles with funnels, and I have to manually sort of get them and transfer them into there and put little rattle balls in there. And it's quite a lengthy process, so I haven't gotten all of my Games Workshop paints, just the ones I tend to use the most in there. But if you are interested in seeing how I do that, I can make a longer video at some point. Army Painter actually comes in multiple ranges. These here are the War Paints brand line, and they are not the same as the Fanatics brand line. They're a little bit thicker, and they need to be thinned down a little bit more. At least I find that to be true when I'm working with them. They're not quite as easily thinned and they don't go on the model as easily as the Warpaint's Fanatics brand, which is the kind that I do recommend that you get. So make sure it says Fanatics when you pick up your Army Painter paints. Another possible alternative, if maybe you've already started and you're using Games Workshop paints already and you think to yourself, oh my god, I already bought some Games Workshop paints and I need to match the color so that it looks right. Or you just want an alternative that comes in the similar colors that comes in dropper bottles. The Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy paint line is really good. I use this a lot. I use this a lot more than anything else, honestly, because I like the consistency of this particular paint. They also come in these nifty little dropper bottles, and this is 15 milliliters, and I cannot remember how much it costs. If I find that, I will put it on the screen right now. The only downside to this is that it may or may not be available where you are. It is not as prevalent in the United States because this is made in the UK. And I've included a link in my description to their store locator, so it can tell you if there is a game store in your area which sells this paint. You cannot order it online, as far as I know, at least not in the United States. I think they're working on that, but time will tell. It's a really good paint, I really like them, and I really like the consistency. As for what type of primer to use, well, I recommend, in a shock that will surprise no one in the miniature painting world, Chaos Black Spray from Citadel. Now, I know what you're thinking, but wait, isn't that expensive? And yes, it is $17.99 for a single can of primer. At least that's what I paid for it, as indicated by this large price sticker here. But honestly, when you're first starting out, this is the best primer to use, because it will, one, be something that you know works, and two, it is the easiest to find. Well, I say that, but they sell out of this stuff a lot in the stores. And as long as you're not, like, spraying tons and tons and tons of models, this will last you for a while, especially if you're just starting out. Now, it is pricey, and do I recommend sticking with it forever? Absolutely not. In fact, I have not used this particular spray can in a long time. I have started priming my models using an airbrush, and if you use an airbrush to start off with, you're asking for a bad time, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do wrong with an airbrush, even with priming, that will cause you to waste a whole lot of money. I may do a video later about airbrushing and what I've learned trying to use an airbrush, but I'm not that good at it. I'm still learning, so hopefully in the future I can speak to more how to use an airbrush well. You can also use a primer that you get from like a store. Like this one is a Krylon primer. I used this one when I first started out painting because I didn't know any better, and it's fine. But what I will say about it is that you end up with some funky looking models, and you don't really know whether or not this stuff is actually going to... I've always been sort of sketched out because I've had some weird primer experiences when it comes to like just like stuff off the shelf from like the Walmart or something. You can also spray paint with colored primers. Citadel makes some, and you can also find others online. Army Painter makes some spray-on primers as well. They also make just a regular black primer. I've never used it before, so I can't really speak to how well it works. I will say that they make other really good stuff, so yeah, definitely check that out if that's something you want. It's maybe a little bit of a lower cost alternative that it will be easy enough to find at your miniature store, because your miniature stores are probably going to carry Army Painter products, and they're probably going to carry Citadel/Games Workshop products if they are a retailer that sells model kits. Okay, next up is what you will paint the model or mini with. And that's something that's kind of super easy to figure out, of course. The first thing you're going to need is brushes. And that's the first step. Now, brushes that you can get, I'm not going to bother showing them here. I'll do a super close-up that I'll cut in while I'm talking. Brushes that you want to get, you want to start off with something cheap and easy. Citadel makes brushes just like they make paints, just like they make all the other stuff, and that's Games Workshop's hobbying brand. You can start with those because they're probably going to be on your game store shelves. But again, I will say they are very expensive for what they are, and you might think to yourself, oh, I can dish out a little bit more for a brush because, well, I'm going to use it often. Also, chances are you're going to screw it up as well because you're going to make mistakes when you first start painting. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to accidentally let the paint get too far down on the brush or not wash it off all the way or something when you first get started painting because you're just not in the habit of taking care of a brush. There are ways that you can make a brush be more preserved, and I will show those to you as well, and I recommend using all of them. However, again, they're really expensive to start off with, and you can get much cheaper synthetic brushes from other companies. Army Painter makes a starter set of 3 brushes, and that's honestly all you're gonna need to begin with. And that's a big thing that I didn't know when I first started the hobby, is that you do not need a whole lot of brushes. All you need is a somewhat large brush for base coating, maybe a small brush for detail work, and then something that you're comfortable dry brushing with if that's a technique that you want to try out, which is a good technique to use for easy highlights and stuff like that. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I actually go into the process of painting in one of my future videos. I can't believe I forgot to mention Monument Hobbies brushes. They are very good and they're very cost effective, so I can't recommend these more. Now, Crayall, my buddy, asks, do you recommend any special tools besides brushes for starting out? When it comes to special tools besides brushes for when you're first starting painting, there's a couple of things that I do recommend that you should get. The first thing that I think you should get is a wet palette. And now you can buy this one that I have here from Army Painter, and they're really not that expensive. Wet palettes aren't that expensive in general, and they're a great thing to have. And a lot of people are intimidated by them, but they're super easy to use. But if you're first starting off, you can actually make your own, and it's super easy to do. And I'm going to show you how to do it right now. Welcome to the far-off land that is known as my kitchen. So, the first thing that we're going to need are our list of supplies to make this wet palette. It's super easy. So, first thing you're going to need is a Tupperware container. Something that you will not miss if you never use it again, because you may not, but paint washes out pretty easily, so you can use it again in theory. The next thing you're going to need is cooking parchment. Whatever you want, other parchment paper is available. I just picked up this generic stuff from Publix because it's super cheap. You're also going to need a paper towel. This one I have folded over into halves because that will make more sense as we go through. You're also going to need a pair of scissors, and you're going to need a pencil. So, first things first, your paper towel, you're going to fold it so that it fits in the bottom of your wet palette. This is a very small Tupperware container, so I will need probably to cut the edges off. So I will do that right now. Bam, there you go. So you want a relatively flat surface, so you just want to make sure that it's not popping up too high. There you go. So you've got a base full of paper towels. Throw away the excess. And now, your parchment paper, freshly opened. I'm going to pull out a sheet. Let's see if this edge tears neatly. It did. Hooray! I'm Okay, once you've got your sheet, go ahead and put your Tupperware on the paper towel like so, with the bottom side facing down. Not paper towel, parchment paper. And just, trace the outside using a pencil. It's the easiest thing to do. So that way you know how big of a piece of paper that you need. Then just take your scissors. And you can use this remnant to create a second wet palette page if you need one. And then you just take your piece of parchment paper and you put it down here. And just make sure that it fits. This fits neatly on top of your paper towels. Roughly so. And there you go. But the wet part of the wet palette, you say? Well, you'll need to follow me over to the sink for that one. So here we are over at the sink. And what you're going to do in order to wet your wet palette is you're first going to just get a little bit of water, and you're going to make sure that the paper towel is nice and soaked through. Now you want to make sure it's absorbed plenty of water, and once it's absorbed water, you want to dump out the excess because you don't want too much water sitting in there. And you just take your piece of parchment paper, set it right there on top. Now, you'll notice that I have some little beads of water up at the top. That's perfectly okay. You want your wet palette to feel sort of clammy and not too wet, and you don't want too much water beaded up on the surface. So I'm going to take a little bit of this water and pour it out, and there you go. This is a perfect starter wet palette. Would I recommend doing this method forever? Absolutely not. But it's great for getting started, especially if you're doing this sort of thing on a budget. And this will be perfect for you to work with to begin with. Now, mine actually feels not quite good enough, so I'll probably add a little bit more water to this. And just try to get it around the edges. Get absorbed in there. And there we go. And just to prove that this works, I'm going to try testing it out and painting them all with it.
And you can use that wet palette for as long as you want, but I recommend after using it to just go ahead and shuck out that paper and that paper towel, because that paper towel and that parchment paper are not going to hold up as well as like regular wet palette stuff, especially the paper towel, and that's going to accumulate mold and it's going to be gross. So what I recommend to do after you've used your wet palette is to just wash out that Tupperware and chuck that parchment paper and paper towel, and whenever you want to use a new one, just repeat the process over, use the same Tupperware container, apologize to your significant other or whoever you borrow the Tupperware from, or if you live alone and you just went out and bought it, you don't have to apologize to anybody, you do your own thing. Just repeat the process. Maybe you can cut out some extra sheets to have on hand for when you are, feeling like painting, you don't have to cut it out every time. That's a good practice to get into if you're planning on doing a lot of it. But yeah, it's super easy to make one yourself, and you don't have to go out and buy a fancy wet palette and spend a ton of money on one. You just make one yourself. So that's one special tool. The other special tools that I recommend are a vessel to keep your water in, and that water is going to be used constantly, so you don't have to have anything fancy. I use this little glass jar with the coil in it to rinse my brushes off and stuff like that.
and to also get water from the pot. I use that because it has a top on it and it helps keep the water in there. It won't evaporate as much. Also, that little coil at the bottom is very gentle, so I can run my brush over it and it'll flick some of the little particles, or they get stuck in my brush, out, and the brush gets cleaner that way. I also still use the Citadel water pot that I bought forever ago. I use that to rinse out my brushes when I'm washing them, so I don't get soapy water in with my painting water. But you don't need a fancy water container. All you need is a mug. Just make sure you don't drink your paint water. It probably won't kill you, but it won't taste that good either. One thing I should mention is that when it comes to brushes, when you're first starting out, you do not want to get the really fancy Kolinsky sable brushes. They are very expensive, and you will screw up brushes to begin with. I'm gonna say that again. You will screw up brushes to begin with. Doesn't matter how careful you are. It doesn't matter how ginger you are with your brushes. You're going to screw them up to begin with. So, don't spend $200 on a set of Artis Opus brushes. I think that's how much they are. Might be more. Only to have them get paint clogged in it and turned into a crazy brush that you can't use anymore. And when it comes to messing up your brushes, it can be very easy when you're first starting out because you're gonna make mistakes. That's fine. You're human. We all learn from our mistakes, right? I also recommend getting something to hold your model or mini with while you're painting it. I use this old painting handle from Games Workshop, and you can get a newer version for a pretty reasonable price, but you don't have to use that. You can also use a cork, or even an old pill bottle for that matter, with just a little bit of blue tack attached to the top of it. There's not really any other special tools I would say that you really need before you get started. Some brush soap is good to have. You can use this little puck thing, or the Master's brush soap, and it will last you for probably 1,000 years. The only reason I don't really use it that much anymore is because it can be really harsh on your brushes and knock your bristles off. And again, use a cheap brush to begin with so you don't have to worry about wrecking your Kolinsky sable brushes. You can also use this brush conditioner from Yo Sonia that I use. It'll keep your brushes a lot cleaner and it won't be as harsh on them like the brush soap that you have to roll your paintbrush into. A lot of the stuff that I find that I buy for mini painting, I sort of steal from Ninjon, so he's done videos on this kind of thing a lot, and I think that he's a good resource as well, so I'll go ahead and ping his channel. So he's got a lot more stuff in his hobby basement than I do in my little hobby corner. Finally, we get to my last question here. What kind of lighting setup do I need for miniature painting? My buddy Travis asked me this. I think that lighting is something that you overlook a lot when it comes to miniature painting. And you think, oh, well, I got a light overhead. That's perfectly fine. But you want enough light to be able to get a good idea of what your miniature is going to look like without casting too much shadows, because you want to be sure to get a good even paint job across it. And if you got a lot of shadows that you're working with, then you could come out with a really funky looking miniature. When I first started painting, I literally only had a desk lamp with one bulb in it that I would just kind of like hover over and use that for my miniature painting. In retrospect, it did not light up the miniature that much, but I painted a whole bunch of minis like it. I painted a whole set of the old school Hero Quest minis with it, and they came out all right. I'll put some pictures up here, which you can see all of them on my Instagram page, Blue Wizard Studio. The lighting setup that I use, I have these two lights that you can see behind me. They are Tautronics reading lights. I don't think they make them anymore, but I have found something very similar, which I have put in the description below as an Amazon affiliate link, which incidentally, most of the stuff that I talked about today is going to be in those Amazon affiliate links in the description of this video. If you click on that link and buy something that you've seen on this video, from that link, you can actually help support the channel, and it is no additional cost to you. So I'd appreciate it. Those reading lights, I have two of them. And all you do is you just turn it up to the highest setting and make sure it's on the reading light setting. And I have two of them sort of like in an arch that illuminate most of my hobby desk, and they work pretty well. I also have a ring light, which is currently illuminating this video, which I will turn on for when I miniature paint. and that is actually a really useful thing. They can be quite expensive, so I don't recommend just buying one if you're just starting out. These two things, these lamps are like $30, so you can get one of them if you have a small hobby setup. It'll do the job of two, and you don't really need both of them so much. There are much more expensive game lamps out there that I have not used, so I cannot speak to their use, but people swear by the Red Grass Games lamp, but it's like $300, and I don't have that kind of money to blow on lights right now. So that is everything that you'll need to start mini painting. Wow, I have been talking for a long time. I was going to go into the process of actually sitting down and painting a miniature from start to finish in this video, but this is already a long enough video for one of my regular videos, and I don't think that I need to go over that just right now. However, there will be a future video coming up that will start the miniature painting process from prime to finish. So keep an eye out for that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you can be in the know when that video comes out. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, Travis, Rachel, thank you very much. And you too can support the channel for only $5 a month on my Patreon page, which will be included in the description below, and you can also see a link to it on your screen right now. And yeah, so that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions regarding where to start with miniature painting or how to start miniature painting, anything like that, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer them in a later video. Or if it's something easy, I'll just reply to it in the comments, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching. I will return with more hobby, gaming, or random nonsense. So until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.